Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and yet again, we have another report of potential Venezuelan gang activity, potential Tren de Aragua activity out of those apartment complexes in Aurora, Colorado, and I just find it fascinating that you still have people to this very day that are in full denial of the existence of a problem based on a bunch of other factors that can exist and actually be true at the same time, because people don't want to believe that open borders have any consequences. So we're going to get into this, we're going to break this down, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Let's turn our attention back to Colorado now, as we're learning more about 14 people who were detained by Aurora police in Colorado at an apartment complex that garnered national attention over the last few months. I want to put up this post here from the Aurora Police Department talking about this, as 14 people have been detained by Aurora police after officers responded to a report of a home invasion with weapons at the Edge at Lowry Apartments. This happened just before 2:30 in the morning overnight, as police patrol officers responded to a report of an armed home invasion.
So if you'll remember, a couple of months before election season, this particular video of people who are suspected to be members of Tren de Aragua were caught breaking into an apartment in Aurora, Colorado, and this was part of what was reported by some as a larger scheme for them to take over this apartment, although people argue about the degree in which that apartment takeover actually occurred. And of course, the mainstream left-wing media had decided immediately that they were going to be in denial of this because illegal migrants are innocent baby angel Aladdins, and in reality, we can't actually talk about the problems and the gangs infiltrating the United States of America because that is actually racism, so they basically told you to shut up, you evil white racist. Now, of course, there were a myriad of alternative explanations for why this was a thing. I want to go through a few of them for you guys out there in the audience so you could hear the counter narrative to this Venezuelan gang takeover story, because I think it is important for you to get the whole entire story, and we actually talked about this on this channel before.
Yeah, good morning to you both. And the neighbors who actually live in the Edge at Lowry Apartments, they actually had a rally yesterday to talk about all of this and say, hey, this is not what's going on. It's actually, this building is kind of a mess and the management company is not taking care of it. And they're asking specifically to talk to the Mayor Mike Kaufman, I should say, here in Aurora. And it sounds like the mayor is on board to chit chat about what's going on. Now, Mayor Mike Kaufman says there have been conversations of an emergency order to take over the complex, but he says that's a last resort. Now, those who live there, they tell us they have had no issues with gang activity, but say the real crime is the horrible living conditions they've been dealing with, like the mountains of trash, bed bugs, and even mice. And they say all of this happening without any help from the property management company. Now,
this entire situation, we've had a change in narrative because of one instance. Everybody's just looking and assigning it to everybody else. We've been paying our rent. There's nobody in there who is asking us for money other than the owner. We have not had to pay anybody. We have not had any issues with security. We are not criminals.
So as talked about on this channel, shortly after that video ended up going viral, you had a bunch of different people changing their positions on the issues at hand, and they started pushing this idea that in reality what was going on here was that the property manager was not properly maintaining the property, and essentially he decided that he was going to hire a PR firm to concoct this Venezuelan crime narrative in order to get out and obfuscate his ability to make repairs. And to be clear, there is some evidence of this property manager being absolutely terrible. Many of the properties under this management company have reported similar problems across the nation, across the state of Colorado, where this guy ends up owning property. So it would not be surprising to me if you have somebody who is in a very opportunistic way not making repairs on these particular properties. However, this ran counter to many of the statements that were issued by politicians like the mayor of Colorado, who was at first putting together a task force in order to break up the gangs.
Mayor Kaufman says the problem is when Venezuelans come across the southern U.S. border, the U.S. can't get their criminal backgrounds like they can with migrants from other countries. That means some violent criminals are settling here. But the question is, why do the problems seem more prevalent in Aurora than other parts of the metro area like Denver?
And then suddenly decided that there were no gangs, which I find to be incredibly odd.
What is relevant is that there are criminals that seem to be working together that are committing crimes. To me, that's what's relevant. We got to get them. We got to get them out of there. Obviously, I don't like the policies at the border, but that it seems like whenever, the pattern here in these properties is that when you have a concentration of Venezuelan migrants, it seems to be a target-rich environment for a criminal element to come in and to exploit them. And I think I'm trying to, be realistic on how I portray this, but I am worried that there is a tendency inherently to exaggerate and to say this incident that's isolated to 3 buildings under the same ownership with the same people, concentration of Venezuelan migrants, is the city of Aurora, that the entire city is unsafe. And that narrative isn't true, and that's a destructive narrative to the economic health of the city.
Now, to be clear, the mayor of Aurora, Colorado is in fact a Republican, so this is not an issue of a partisan cover-up or anything of the sort, and of course, it could be true that there are major problems with Venezuelan migrant gangs in these apartment complexes, in addition to the fact that these apartment complexes are typically run terribly by this property management company. In fact, you would probably think that one of the reasons why the gangs might target these particular complexes is due to the fact that they're often in disrepair, they don't have adequate security, and thus that ends up leading to the problems. And in fact, there were timelines that were put out that basically went over all the different documented instances of crime related to this that involved people saying that they were working there as a cleaner for the apartment and they were robbed and forced to turn over keys to these gang members. And essentially, when people are forced out of these apartments due to a myriad of circumstances, new people end up moving in. And we also had the person who filmed that video, who had that security system, end up saying that yes, they were leaving not due to the disrepair and the dysfunction of the apartment, but due to the fact that gang activity was too prevalent in that area, and one day they woke up to find bullet holes in their car.
The video was shot in the building where Cindy and Edward Romero lived until today. They loaded up their stuff and moved out.
It's been a nightmare and I can't wait to get out of here.
This is how Cindy used to lock her front door.
Every day when we come home, we have to do this. Every time we go outside to take out the garbage, every time we try to go to bed at night, we have to keep it like this so nobody can kick in the door.
The couple's car and many others here were riddled with bullets after a shootout at the complex earlier this month. The Romeros say the trouble started when a large number of migrants began moving in. They had not been able to move out for different reasons.
We couldn't get any. We tried reaching out to the resources, but they told us since it wasn't actually a condemned building, we would have to wait until that was the issue, but we didn't want to wait for that. So the only help I got was after talking to you.
Now, of course, this all ended up culminating with JD Vance doing an interview where he was told that basically this was no big deal, it was greatly exaggerated, and that he was spreading propaganda because it's only a few apartment complexes in this very notorious clip that I want to play for you because it is the height of absurdity.
The incidents were limited to a handful of apartment complexes, and the mayor said our dedicated police officers have acted on those concerns. A handful of problems.
Only, Martha, do you hear yourself? Only a handful of apartment complexes in America were taken over by Venezuelan gangs, and Donald Trump is the problem and not Kamala Harris's open border. Americans are so fed up with what's going on, and they have every right to be. And I really find this exchange, Martha, sort of interesting because you seem to be more focused with nitpicking everything that Donald Trump has said rather than acknowledging that apartment complexes in the United States of America are being taken over by violent gangs. I worry so much more about that problem than anything else here. We've got to get American communities in a safe space again. And unfortunately, when you let people in by the millions, most of whom are unvetted, most of whom you don't know who they really are, you're going to have problems like this. Kamala Harris, 94 executive orders that undid Donald Trump's successful border policies. We knew this stuff would happen. They bragged about opening the border, and now we have the consequences, and we're living with it. We can do so much better, but frankly, we're not going to do better, Martha, unless Donald Trump calls this stuff out. I'm glad that he did.
So yeah, I'm 100% in agreement with JD Vance right there. There is no appropriate number of apartment complexes, however few, to be taken over by gangs that should be acceptable in the United States of America and that weren't indicative of the many problems with our border policy under the Biden administration and under border czar Kamala Harris. Obviously, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 or 20, that's going to be a small percentage of the apartments in the United States of America, but it's still going to be a dramatic problem. It's still going to be a dramatic issue. And yes, while there is gang activity in the Denver area, while there is gang activity in Aurora, Colorado, let's be clear about that. The fact of the matter is that is not an excuse and not an adequate deflection from the fact that we're importing gang activity from the third world, from Venezuela, whether they are Tren de Aragua or not. And the police commissioner, in this particular press conference that he did, talking about the White House's response to that, made it clear that he is not happy with what is being presented to him by the federal government.
I think historically, this has been a very problematic location based upon, again, and I'm not pointing fingers, law enforcement is completely apolitical. But when this started, again, when you look at the history of this, again, I had a discussion with an individual from the White House, and that occurred back on September the 23rd, I believe. And that person basically told me that, hey, once these immigrants get across the border, that's all we really care about. And to me, that's a problem. That's a huge problem, because we have individuals that come to a country, they get dropped off into a community, they have absolutely no infrastructure, they have absolutely no support, they have absolutely no guidance from the federal government about what to do, how to live, how to survive. And this is the ramifications of that activity. This is the ramifications of not monitoring what's occurring, how it's occurring, and who it is occurring to. And so, Aurora, we are now in the process, as many other cities throughout this nation, of trying to pick up the pieces of an incredibly bad system that was in place.
So in this current instance, they ended up detaining about 14 people who are unknown whether or not they're migrants at this point in time. This, by the way, is very common at the point of detention, at the point of arrest, for us to determine, because again, it's not like people are going to be forthcoming about their affiliation with a gang or forthcoming about their illegal immigration status. And essentially, they kidnapped multiple individuals who happen to be Venezuelan migrants as well. They did what the police chief ended up describing as torture.
I would say anybody that's held against their will, I would say anybody that's bound is tortured. That was not a decision that they made. It was the fact of the incident. Again, they were pistol whipped, they were beat, they were mistreated. One of the male was actually stabbed. He had a stab wound. So does that fall in the category of torture for me? Yeah, it does.
Chief, you used the word gang. Do you think these are members of TDA?
Again, I can guarantee you, I will give you my expertise and my knowledge of what I believe. This is without question a gang incident. I don't know which gang they are affiliated with yet. It might be TDA. It could not be TDA. We will determine that, and we will find that out. But right now, as I said before, it is incredibly hard to identify specifically as TDA because there is no specific markers, there is no specific identifiers. Unless they self-identify as TDA, I am not going to say that they are TDA. But what I will say is, based on the actions that I saw, based upon how this event unfolded, this is 100% gang activity. It's gang activity at Dallas. There are Venezuelans involved. So again, there is a high assumption that they may be affiliated with the TDA gang. But again, I am not going to say 100% positively until that is validated and verified. And that investigation, again, this occurred last night. We rolled up on this at 6 o'clock. We have been dealing with this since 2 o'clock last night. So again, this is still very initial information. We are still doing search warrants on all of the locations back at that apartment complex.
And this, of course, was done throughout the course of this apartment complex, involving at least the utilization of 2 different units that the gang members had somewhat control over.
Last night, right at about 8:45 p.m. At 1258 Dallas Street, victims, it was a male and a female, they were accosted by approximately 13 to 15 armed individuals. 13 of those were males, and 3 of those were possibly females at this time, is what we were thinking. They were taken to an adjoining apartment complex against their will at that same Dallas complex, and they ended up at 1268 Dallas. Again, this was the same complex, same area. The victims notified the police right at about 0227. Our officers immediately responded to that location. They made contact with the victims. They got initial information about what occurred, how it occurred, when it occurred, and where it occurred. And then ultimately, simultaneously, additional officers, Aurora police officers, responded to the actual crime scene. They locked down the apartment complex located at 1268 Dallas. They began a systematic search, and they ultimately made contacts with several different apartments. And they ultimately, in one apartment, located about 15 individuals that were inside there. Based upon the identifications, based upon what we know at this time, it appears that most of those individuals in that one apartment were involved in this terrible, terrible crime.
And of course, this is one of the major problems that people don't talk about all that often with this gang activity in the United States of America, is that many a times these migrant gangs ultimately end up victimizing migrant populations. Now, many of people, again, are in full denial of whether or not this is a problem. They say this is no big deal, nothing to worry about. Oh my God, you're exaggerating so hard. There is no gang activity. Just shut up, shut your stupid face. But in reality, the American people are tired of being gaslit. They're tired of being lied to, and they're tired of being played for fools when it comes to these particular issues, because we can see the criminality unfold. It happens to keep making the news, and now people are still talking about it post the election. So the idea that this is a pre-election lie, to me, ends up fading more and more into the background. Now look, obviously we're going to get more details about the particular circumstances surrounding this case right here, but I think as of right now, we should have a clear mind on what is going down, or what is most likely to be going down in this Aurora, Colorado apartment complex. And by the way, there's 3 different apartment complexes that are under this property manager in which the claims of Venezuelan gang takeover are occurring, and I think this is what is most likely to be true as of right now, and that is gangs, including Venezuelan gangs, have infiltrated these various properties. Obviously, the criminal activity and extortion is going on to some degree, and this has caused a bunch of normal, ordinary tenants to move out. Again, we have heard from these normal, ordinary tenants themselves. They have produced their own videos with their own evidence and talked about the circumstances that they're dealing with, and it appears, in my opinion, that a bunch of migrants are moving into the vacated apartments and are likely squatting in those vacated apartments. Now, as per the idea that they're taking over and collecting all the rent money, that seems to be varying degrees of true depending on the sources that you look at. For instance, a lot of people are harping on somebody who said that they were essentially robbed for $20. $20 doesn't appear to be enough money for rent, and doesn't appear to be enough money for an extortion scheme, but it is very possible, in my opinion, that some of the migrants that are essentially squatting on the vacated apartments are paying some money to these Venezuelan gangs for their residency. We also have instances of maintenance people being attacked, being jumped. We have people being robbed in these complexes for their keys. So I think this is a supported theory. That being said, I think for a large portion of the people who are still the ordinary tenants that were before the Venezuelan gang takeover, to whatever degree that you want to talk about, those people are likely not paying rent to the Venezuelan gangs. They are paying rent to the property management company, which is who they should be paying rent to. So essentially, you have a confluence of factors in that this building was probably in a significant state of disrepair. That's why the city of Aurora was going after them. That's why the state of Colorado was going after them. And in addition to that, that disrepair, that blight, has drawn in a lot of gang activity, because if you can move out of these apartments, you probably would, based on the disrepair and whatnot. So you have a vulnerable population, and when you have vulnerable populations, those people are often the very same people that are exploited by these Venezuelan gangs. Now, of course, we have this instance right here that we're going to get more details about. We're going to find out exactly why they were kidnapping these people, why they were torturing them, why they were going after them, and all that. And I think that eventually will lead us to find out that most of the perpetrators of this particular crime were illegal migrants, were Venezuelan, and may have been members of Tren de Aragua, or members of affiliated gangs or different gangs in the nation of Venezuela, or that originated in the nation of Venezuela. That is essentially my assessment based on the facts that we have right now, when we will see over time as this comes more to the public eye, especially without all the different pressures related to the presidential election campaign, where obviously there is great disincentives to tell the truth from the Democratic Party. However, the same disincentives to tell the truth from the Aurora mayor are still going to exist. So I expect them to downplay this to a certain degree, but obviously we need some on-the-ground reporters to go and talk to these people, get the real story, so we can find out the truth. Now, with all that being said, I will leave the floor open to you. What do you think about this particular new incident? What do you think about the Aurora, Colorado story? Is this yet another instance of a right-wing conspiracy theory being being promoted by nut jobs and evil white racists proven to be true, or is it really just the property management company continuously staging all these crimes, hiring paid actors in order to make sure that he never has to change those hot water heaters in these Aurora apartments? Again, all your thoughts down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about what's going down in Aurora. Till next time.